Question 59 is from Deputy Catherine Martin.
An Cordag is a Risha Aragim Gakra Urtha, the role Nua Minister. I would like to thank you, or wish you well again in your new role, and thank you for engaging so positively with us today on the important topic of mental health and promoting it in our schools in the Education Committee earlier today. My question relates to the capitation grant, which was increased by 5% in the recent budget. However, it still leaves it well below the level it was in 2010 for both primary and secondary schools. So do you intend to restore it fully as committed to in the Action Plan for Education 2016 to 2019, and if so, what is the timeline for same?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. And the Deputy will be aware of the many pressing demands within education, which my predecessor had to consider in recent years, and his predecessor, Rory Quinn. Important changes have been made resourcing and reforming provision for children with special educational needs, rolling out junior cycle reform, strengthening school leadership, reducing primary class size, restoring guidance teachers, providing for extra students at all levels, providing for new skill needs in apprenticeships and traineeships and in higher education. I fully recognise the need to improve capitation funding for schools. I was pleased to provide for our Minister Britton. I was pleased that Minister Britton provided for a 5% increase in funding for capitation for primary and post-primary schools that will apply from the start of the 2019 to 20 school year. Obviously, I must be prudent in the context of ongoing budgetary pressures, and I have to prioritise where it is not possible to do everything that I would like to do in the education sector in any one year, especially in the light of increasing enrolments. It is my intention to answer your question as black and white as I possibly can. It is my intention to seek funding for further capitation increases in future budgets.
Martin.
Thank you, Minister. And I do appreciate the former Minister Bruton had a lot of issues to consider and consider to prioritise, but schools have been pleading for this for many years now. And, you know, an increase in the recent budget, it was something, but, you know, it was very, very small. Capitation grant funding is still well below where it was in 2010, and it's hardly surprising that the INTO described it as pittance, because it actually equates to only 4.6 cents per student per day. And as the ASTI said, it will only keep up with the growing student numbers. It's simply not adequate for the real cost of running a school in Ireland today. Principals are under huge financial stress to make the money stretch, even more so in the case of my constituency in Dublin Rathdown, where school costs can be higher, but the principals have the same amount of money to work with per student as everywhere else. And, you know, schools are buckling under this weight, and we talked today, Minister, about relieving the stress of teachers and principals, and this is one case where you could relieve the stress by proper restoration of the capitation grant. And so the action plan said it's to begin in 2017 and happen over 3 years, yet here we are, the first sign of an increase, and it's 2019. So what is that clear timeline, please, that principals and parents and teachers can rely upon?
Travels around my own constituency over the last number of years. When you speak to primary principals, secondary principals, the capitation grant always comes up. It's a lifeline for many schools in terms of running the schools and running costs. Going back to 2009, the reduction was 11%, so it was a massive, massive reduction at the time. This year, we've brought it up by 5%, and annual funding would need to be increased by a further 25.5 million approximately to restore grants to pre-2011 levels. So I'm not going to give you a false picture as to how we can get there in an X amount of time, but just to give you my commitment here today, Deputy, and I know no doubt it'll come up at committee as well, when we look at our 2019 programme, we're going to have conversations around that, but also within our 3-year strategic plan, which I want your committee feeding into how we can get there as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
I appreciate your commitment, and actions can speak louder than words, so I will be holding you to that, as will the committee, because we held a specific summer school on costs and school costs in September in the Education Committee, and the impacts of a diminished capitation grant are twofold. You know, first of all, principals are continually stretched beyond and beyond to make the most of the money they do get. further complicated by the minor works grant being announced later and later every year. It's something, again, Minister, to bring to your attention. You know, it's looking like there'll be no minor works grant for 2018. It'll come in 2019, and that's a huge stress again on schools when they're trying to work out where everything goes. And secondly, what was emphasised to us at that summer school in the Education Committee, it's the pressure that we continue to place on parents to cover that gap. Through the voluntary contribution. We're now burdening parents not just with the increasing costs of sending their children to school with uniforms and books, but now they're trying to keep the schools afloat, and that's not acceptable. And the annual letter that parents now receive from schools seeking a voluntary contribution, it's far from voluntary. So I would just ask you to really, as I say, the action. I need to see this happening soon, and because what our principals need now is, I refer to circulars that Deputy Boyd Barrett referred to. We need less circulars and more investment in our schools.
Byrne, you have a supplementary briefly on this.
I have to say that I was disappointed with the budget allocation for capitation. And it was something that my party leader had prioritised, and there was a range of issues in the negotiations. But I have to say that it seemed to me, and Minister McHugh wasn't involved in this, but there seemed to be a huge reaction against giving something significant in the capitation grant. Maybe because Fianna Fáil were looking for it, and I thought that was a dreadful way to approach what the children need, but also it was a dreadful way to approach the commitments that are in the programme for government to set out increase in capitation, and also to do other things that are in the programme for government that would mean increased capitation for schools, and nothing has been done in relation to them. So it was huge disappointment for schools that the capitation grant didn't go up, and they're still going to struggle for money, and they're still going to be coming to you for emergency works when maybe they could have done proper works at the time they were needed to be done if they had the money coming in at the right time.
Please.
Look, it is an issue. I've already raised it with my officials yesterday morning. It was one of a number of priorities that I raised, and I did make the point that we have to look at find a pathway in the short to medium term to get extra revenue into capitation. So I've committed to that. I look forward to working with you all in order to get there and help hopefully make the collective choice and get the consensus around that. But can I also just say that having met a number of officials from the Department of Education at this stage, I haven't met them all because there's 1,300 of them working hard in Athlone, Tullamore and Dublin, but I do get a sense from them that they're heeding the importance of long-term planning for schools. And I already said here today, Deputy, you mentioned the minor works. That money needs to be announced this side of Christmas. The summer work programmes needs to be announced this side of Christmas, and we need to look at giving schools more of a lead-in time. They have enough pressures, they have a lot on their plate. There's principals teaching, there's principals doing the admin, there's principals carrying a very, very heavy load, and I think it's something that I'm going to be very conscious of in this role. Thank you.